What's going on, y'all? Wanted to share a testimony of me preaching the gospel to a gay man. Actually, not only a gay man, a gay porn star. Actually, very famous gay porn star as well. Want to kind of just break down why I did it, and hopefully this is a kind of a new series I want to do in regards to encouraging you all in regards to your evangelistic opportunities. We find that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. And sometimes people want to preach the gospel, they just don't know what it looks like, and they need some context. They need some people who are there in their circles trying to give them some clarity and whatnot. Also, forgive me for the wind if it's loud. Not my intention, obviously. But anyways, so let's chat about it. First off, I was a little background on this specific scenario. I can't give you a lot of beneficial context in regards to how the conversation started, because I was asked to be by an atheist on an interview, on a podcast interview with him and somebody who there'd be a real wow, shock and awe kind of factor. I'm a Christian, straight man, obviously have my view on homosexuality that the Bible has, and he found a gay porn star who was willing to do the interview. So if you want to check that out, it's on my channel. The whole interview is. But anyways, we spoke, and I want to kind of cover this plus a few other conversations I've had with gay men. Every conversation I've had with these men, first off, I want to say, all ended with us both almost in tears, grateful for the conversation and the experience that we had together. The reason I want to mention this is because we've had a picture painted in society and whatnot that people in these conversations, that they need to be these hot and bothered, red in the face, infuriated kind of conversations. And I believe that this is a horrible misunderstanding of how we're supposed to speak to people. Scripture says that we're supposed to speak the truth to one another in love. And if we're speaking the truth in love to one another, this kind of thing is not happening. This kind of thing happens when we're not speaking the truth in love. We're just saying something that a political, commentator told us to say, or a kind of tweet type roast type scenario. And I don't want us to do that as Christians. I want us to be speaking the truth in love as Christians and being honest with people, but also being loving and focusing on the loving part, especially with these politically charged kind of topics like this. So anyways, I spoke to this man, and I did not bring up the topic of why homosexuality was a sin. And the reason I didn't bring up this topic is because we as Christians, we as people, find all the reasons to talk about the things that we disagree with, but ironically, we push further and further away from the actual conversation of the gospel, which is actually the only conversation that matters, believe it or not. Scripture says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, or 3 rather, Paul says, "I did not come with superiority of speech or eloquence of words, but when I came to you, I determined to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified." Paul, somebody who's a Pharisee of Pharisees, Hebrew of Hebrews, knew the law like anybody did. He was a genius when it came to his biblical knowledge. He said that he determined to know nothing except Christ and him crucified. The point wasn't that he only knew Christ crucified, but when he spoke to the Corinthians, he believed that it was only beneficial to them to speak about Christ and him crucified. So anyways, with all of that being said, this is obviously something as Christians that we are called to, consider in regards to our evangelistic outreach. So anyways, what I did talk to him about was morality, because they asked me the question about my view on homosexuality, and I responded with their view of morality, and they believed in an absolute standard of morality. One of them did, the other was kind of, vague on it, and I was proving a point that morality comes from God, and it can only come from God. And I used that avenue to bring up the entire conversation that we had about what was right and what was wrong. If it wasn't for this, then we would have been in kind of this gray area the entire time. So I expressed to them that you're just as bad as Hitler, just like I'm just as bad as Hitler, and our moral views are all equally as valuable. But God created a moral standard that we're all supposed to live by, and that is what we are supposed to consider as Christians. So, or rather as people, it's just that there has to be an absolute standard of morality, or no one's right or wrong. Everyone just has a different gray area of views. And we obviously know things like that aren't true, because if so, that means that things like Hitler slaughtering 9 million people wasn't wrong. He just had a different view than somebody else did. And obviously we know that that's a horrible thing to say, and nobody agrees with that. So anyways, when we created that kind of foundation, then it allowed us to get to the topic of, since we know that there is an absolute standard of morality, where does that absolute standard come from? If it comes from God, then we have to find out which God it is. And at the end of the day, he kind of had the belief system that everyone just kind of has their own views, and lets everybody believe what they want to believe. And again, that sounds all great, fuzzy, and cuddly, but we have to do something with the statements that are inclusive, or rather exclusive, in regards to the different belief systems. Like when Scripture says in John 10, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody comes to the Father except through me. We have to do something with these kinds of statements, because if we don't do something with these kinds of statements, then we're being dishonest to what these belief systems say. And you just to say everybody has their own belief systems, that contradicts explicitly with Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life. So what do we do with a statement like that? Well, we've got to take it and say it's either right or it's wrong. It's either absolutely right or it's absolutely wrong. And through our conversations together, we had kind of came to the conclusion that he thinks that Jesus is great. He thinks that he was an awesome kind of leader, thought leader and everything, but he was going to let it end there. And the irony with that is he couldn't ever give a firm claim on whether Jesus was right or Jesus was wrong, since he couldn't come with a firm, direct, pointed statement like that, because he recognized that he couldn't justify his belief. He couldn't justify his belief. And after we talked about absolute standard morality and stuff like that, he didn't know even how to answer, because no one had kind of expressed these kinds of things to him. So anyways, after our conversation, it didn't leave with this man's salvation at that point. He has too much that he has banking on everything. You know, what I like to consider or compare this to is the rich young ruler story. The rich young ruler, frankly, simply had too much to give up. There was too much that was to be lost if he ended up saying no to the gospel. If he ended up saying yes to the gospel. So what I have found is that it's most important to do just as Jesus has commanded us to do, which is to tell people, show people, preach to people to count their costs. Because the costs of being a Christian are the things that will determine the rest of your life, the rest of your years. Whereas if we do not let count the costs be the first thing, it's going to be one of the later things, and probably the last thing that will determine whether somebody chooses to reject Jesus later on or not. So I found I'd rather the man reject Jesus today and make sure that he's confident about where he stands with Jesus than be in this gray, fuzzy, wuzzy area and just choose to like maybe be kind of half in, half out. Jesus has great teachings, great thought leader, but I'm not going to follow him kind of mentality, which unfortunately, again, I'm hearing a lot of nowadays. So hopefully these kinds of testimonies will encourage you. I know I shared a lot of scripture and a lot of perspective with that, but I'm going to be making more of these testimony videos if you all like them. I find people get really encouraged by the testimonies, so I'm going to keep bringing them if you guys keep enjoying them. So if you would, like, subscribe, and I'll chat with you guys in the next one.